All right, so we're live with the iOS live stream. We just got finished with the Android live stream, so if you're interested in watching that, that'll get posted to the channel here in a second. Couple hours actually. We did have some issues with the live feed and actually having video for that, but all the notes will be posted on the repo. I'll put what I talk about and other resources in the video's description, including code that we may go through. But in this video, we're going to talk about CocoaPods, what they are, and why you should be using them. Now, feel free to ask questions in the chat if you are on the live stream, and if you are watching this afterwards, put them into the comments below, and I'll address them either next video or answer them right there and then. So again, these videos are for you guys. Feel free to ask questions. If you want us to cover a particular topic, then put it up on the in the comments, and we'll let you have at it. So let's get started with CocoaPods. Now, CocoaPods are a really nice way of adding external or third-party code to your Xcode projects. So in iOS, we are developing our application, and we might need to have some functionality that grabs or detects whether we're on the network, or we need to grab some interface, or we need to implement an SDK that, say, Google or somebody else has implemented. Now, in the past, what we would have to do is we would have to take the code, check it out of a repository, and then either build it as a library and then drop that library in, or download that library directly, drop it into our project, compile. But if those third-party projects ever got updated, you'd have to go through that process again. And so what CocoaPods allows us to do is allows us to update and manage those third-party libraries really, really efficiently. And not only that, is if those third-party libraries have dependencies of their own, it would go ahead and manage those dependencies as well. Now, if we're downloading a third-party piece of software, let's say from Amazon Web Services or something like that, and they come out with a brand new version which breaks our version, well, we can lock in on a particular version of that third-party piece of software so that we're always on that version. And then when we're ready to update, we can update. Now, you can kind of imagine that this gets a little confusing and complex as we have more dependencies. So we have to be very, very careful of our dependencies. But let me go ahead and show you how easy it is to install CocoaPods. So if you're just starting from scratch, what you'll want to do on your command line is, let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see, is to use a sudo, so switch user and super user type stuff, get install CocoaPods. Now, this will use the gem, the Ruby system, and if you don't have that installed, then you go ahead and install it. I believe I installed mine via Homebrew. So if you don't know what that is, just search for Homebrew Mac, and you'll be able to download that, install Ruby and gems, and then once you get that, you can get this gem command line tool. So then we use that to install CocoaPods, and then it goes and installs the actual pod software that we can then use. So I have all that installed already. I'm going to open up iTerm here, and we'll hit the command line. No thanks. Okay, let me make this guy a little bit bigger for you. Okay, so right now I'm in my home directory. I'm going to switch over to a development directory, and we're going to have the ability to run the command line for pod. So if I run pod, there's going to be some things that it does. You can see the usage of it. Let me make this a little bit expanding here. So here's all the commands that we get, some of the options we can put in. We're going to mostly use the install method in today's class. So I'm going to open up a new project in Xcode. Okay, start with a new Xcode project for this one. And we're just going to stick with a single view application. We're not going to do any programming today, but I'm going to show you how to add these libraries to Xcode. So I'm just going to call this project name CocoaPods. Okay, everything else looks good. And we'll drop it into our development folder. Okay, that looks fine. So create it in the development folder. All right, so now we have our Xcode project file. So if I say open current file, I can show my Finder window. So open and then space dot or period. Should open a Finder window in that directory. There it is. Took a little second here. So here's our newly created Xcode project folder. All right, so if you've never used CocoaPods before or any large-scale application, you might have only seen this file here, this file extension .xcodeproj. So again, that's a Xcode project. Now with CocoaPods, we're not going to use that anymore, so I'm going to close the Xcode project in the background. And instead, what CocoaPods is going to do, because we have all these other dependencies that need to be compiled concurrently, is we're going to create a workspace. And don't worry, CocoaPods does all this automatically. So once we are in the directory, let me do a list directory here. So we have our CocoaPods directory. I'm going to change directory into that and show you here are all the 4 files that we have. And this is to add CocoaPods to our project. It's as simple as pod install, or excuse me, init. Okay, what did that do? Let's list the directory. Simply added this pod file. If we cat that pod file, you can see it added a little bit of pod code here. Let's go to our folder here. It's a previous project. All right, so it added this pod file. Well, that pod file does literally nothing at this point. What we have to do next is we have to do pod install on the command line. So 2 steps, and that's it. It goes ahead and says it has installed and created this Xcode workspace. All right, so if we go back to our Finder, now you can see that we have a couple more folders and files. So we have our pods folder, and this will include all of the supporting files for this. We have a pod lock file, and then we have our pod file. We'll get to that in a second. So more importantly, you now want to kind of ignore this Xcode project. We never want to open this again. Instead, we're going to open the Xcode workspace. Okay, so it looks almost no different from a regular Xcode project, except for the fact that we now have 2 projects included here. So we have the CocoaPods, which is the original project that I set up, and then we have this new one called Pods. And here's the pod file attached to it, and you can see that it's now nicely highlighted for us. All right, so let's go through this pod file really quickly, because this is where we're going to add the lines of code to add our dependencies for third-party libraries, right next to here. So the first thing is we have a target, and that target in this case is called CocoaPods. And so where we get that target from, if you click on your project's settings up in the top left-hand corner, and then go over to, if it's not showing, you hit this little, this button here that'll show the targets in the project. All right, so right now, these are our targets. We have the CocoaPods, we have the CocoaPods test, and the CocoaPods UI test. So those are 3 targets. Now going back to the pod file, you can see we have this target, the target pods test, and then the pods UI test. Okay, so those are your different targets. If you have different dependencies for those targets, you can put them under each respective block here. So I put it there if I just want certain pod files that only go in my tests, but otherwise they go into the application underneath this line of code. Okay, so maybe you're still not understanding what CocoaPods are. So let's go back to the website and see. So you can obviously read the website, but let me just show you some of the different objects that we have, or different libraries that we have in here. So usually when I'm starting off with a project, I need to know whether that application has access to the network. So we call that reachability. Apple used to have some example code on their website. It was in Objective-C, and then people took that and made it into Swift, but it's expanded from there. And so if you just type in reach, we have reach, and it's version 1.1.0. You can jump right to the site. We have reachability 3.2, so that's maybe a little bit more mature if you're evaluating different versions of this. We have reachability Swift, version 4.3. Doesn't mean it's any better than this one, it just means it has a higher version, which almost means nothing these days. But as you can see, there's a whole ton of other reachability libraries. So go through them, determine which one matches your needs. Sometimes you just need a simple one. But let's say I wanted to install this reachability Swift. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And you can see that this is the GitHub account for it. So you can go and you can contribute to the code. You can see what the license is, the release day. It was fairly recently. Oops, sorry, October 2018. Okay, so a couple other things that you might want to see: how popular it is. So total downloads 10 million. So it's probably a pretty popular one. You can kind of read the information. All this information comes from the readme.md file for the GitHub account. So pretty much what you see here is what you'll see on the GitHub account. And again, evaluate it, see if it's an active project. Projects that haven't been updated in the last couple of months or years, it's probably not a good candidate to include in your project, because if Apple comes out with a new version of either Swift or Xcode or iOS, and that third-party dependency breaks, well, you're pretty much relying on that third party to update their software, or you can contribute a patch to it, but it becomes a nightmare. So do be careful, make sure you're selecting the projects appropriately. All right, so how do I add this project to my, this third-party project to my project? Usually there's a one line of code installation that you can find. And so right here under pod reachability Swift, that's all we need. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And then of course you can follow the instructions, but just to give you a preview of it, we're going to run pod install on the command line, and then we're going to import the reachability in our code. So again, we go over to Xcode, and we're going to drop that in, as you can see, underneath our use frameworks, which comes from this guy. And as you add more, you just add them one after the other. Okay, so if you save that and build it, nothing happens because it hasn't installed these dependencies yet. So let's go back to our command line and just run pod install. You can see that it's going to install a couple of different files. It's going to pull this Git repository and a bunch of other things. Maybe I should have run this before, but as I mentioned, it's going to run, it's going to download a whole bunch of things for you automatically, and then let's find some other dependencies we can add. So I'm going to go back up here, can hit back to go back to search. So sometimes, okay, so reachability, I want to make sure that the application has the ability to reach the internet, and if not, I want to display a message or handle that appropriate. And then the next thing I want to usually do in an application is display a loading screen. And so we usually call those HUDs, or heads-up displays. So if I just type in HUD, you can see a whole bunch of different HUDs and implementations of those. We can take a look at this progress HUD, which is one I've used in the past. Apparently the developer is available for hire, so if you like his work, he's available. But you can see different screenshots of what this looks like, and you evaluate if that fits within your application. If not, you can always go back and search for more. What's another one I used? I don't know if I've used, I think, this one. Yep, so you can just see different screenshots and whatnot. This looks pretty similar to the previous one. Let's take a look at this one. Usually what I'll do is I'll open these up in different tabs, look at the style. So this one looks pretty cool, looks different. The next thing I'll probably want to do, oh yeah, I have used this one before, is I want to see how much code it takes to use this. Okay, so they usually give a quick usage, two lines of code, and you're done. So this looks like a good one, and I've used this one before, so I can attest to the fact that yes, it is indeed pretty good. All right, so let's go ahead and add this. Let's find that pod file. So for this one in particular, not only do they have the line of code that you would use in your pod file to install it, but they also specify a very specific version number. So again, if they upgrade to iProgress HUD version 2 and you just update it automatically, then it could break your application because the API might have changed. And so we can lock it down to a specific version, or we can just say anything after version 1.0. So whether that's version 1.1, version 1.2, etc., we can make that distinction or not. So either minor versions, patch versions, or major versions, how we want to update it. So we have a lot of control over how these get updated. So let me go ahead and copy this line of code, go back to Xcode, put that in like that, save that file, see how our dependencies are running. I think it's because I'm running this for the first time on this account. It's taken a little bit longer than usual. Quite a big hefty download, but it should be done in a second. And then I'll have to run it again because this is just installing the previous pod, the reachability one. Okay, so while that's doing that, let's take a look at some other ones that you may be interested in, or maybe you're just thinking, maybe you don't know what you don't know. So if you have some images in your application, you might type in image and say, oh, there's an image slideshow that I can implement. That might actually make my app a lot better. Image picker, reinventing the way that image picker works. So if I open that up in a new tab, yeah, that looks pretty neat. What's the license on it? Apparently this one is unknown, so that might be a little sketchy. I always look at the license because I don't know if I'm allowed to even use this. It might just be up there for educational purposes, and if I'm trying to put this into a commercial app, I might get into trouble if it has a proprietary license on instead of a MIT or something like that. So, okay, for this one it is a MIT license, so that's good. So again, be very careful with this. The number of downloads, 500,000. I think that's a pretty popular project here. You can see how many stars it has on GitHub, how many people are watching it, how many forks. So you can tell a lot about this. Another thing I like to do is see how many open issues there are and what those issues are. So I would have to go over to the GitHub account, which we can do really quickly. Open that up in a new tab. And look at the, as I said, the issues. Let's click on the tab up here. And just kind of skim through them to see if there's any deal breakers. Oftentimes what I'll see is it breaks on iOS 12, or, you know, and it's like, okay, well, that's a deal breaker because, well, there you go, right there, iOS 12 support. So I'd open that up and see, is this ready for iOS 12? And if not, maybe I don't include it because it's going to break when iOS 12, when somebody has iOS 12 installed. So here's the question. You can see whether it's resolved with the contributor or with the maintainer of the project is thinking about it, etc. And the nice thing about open source is you can always create pull requests for patches. So this is a nice way of discovering different third-party libraries that you may not be familiar with. Okay, so, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes and see if there's any questions on the live stream. Okay, the next thing is, you know, obviously images are a big thing. Table views. Well, obviously Apple already implements their own version of table view, but again, these are libraries that you might want to use that other people have developed to add different functionality so that you don't have to do it. Again, caveat, be very careful about adding additional dependencies because hence the name, you're dependent upon this developer. But let's take a look at Table View Dragger. So Table View Dragger has a little nice GIF image here. You can drag these table views. That's pretty cool. How easy is it to implement? Well, here's another feature of it. So if you want that functionality, man, just include the CocoaPod and let's go ahead and see how easy it is to implement. So we would implement a delegate and a couple other things. We'd set up some variables here. These are all the variables that we can change as part of the behavior of this, and we just implement these dragger delegate functions. So it's fairly easy. Hopefully you know a little bit about delegates. If not, we have videos on how to do table view controllers and all that lot. But yeah, this one looks pretty simple to do. It has a lot of different options, which is kind of important because sometimes what one developer will implement is not quite what I need, and I don't really want to have to dive into their code and edit it. So it's really nice that they give you these different options of the zoom scale and the alpha or the transparency of the cells. So it does look like this one would meet some of my basic needs for drag and dropping for table views. If I didn't want to automatically, or if I didn't want to implement it myself, this automatically will implement it for me. So to varying degrees. So take a look at the different ones. One more, couple more that I want to show you. Email checker, email picker, email feedback. So prompting your users to give you feedback via email. Just all sorts of different things. And then finally, the one I did want to show you for sure is Amazon's a really big company. They put out a lot of source code for you to use in your applications, in your iOS applications, Android applications that utilize and leverage their services. So they have a whole AWS core SDK that you can put in, but other things like Kinesis and DynamoDB, mobile analytics for AWS, AWS Lambda, if you want to do Lambda services, functionless or serverless functions in the cloud, that type of thing, really, really powerful AWS service. You can implement that within your iOS application, meaning you can communicate with the Lambda service under your account very, very easily. So machine learning, they have a service in AWS. Now, if you're not familiar with AWS, go take a look at them because they do have a lot of free tiers that you can use a lot of these different applications free within your application as long as you fall under the threshold. And if you're just getting started, it's more than likely that you fall under those thresholds. For example, they have an SMTP server that sends out emails, and I think like the first 1,000 emails are free, maybe, for a month. Every month you get about 1,000. I might be wrong on those numbers, but it is a very, very high number. And so if you're getting to the point where you're sending out thousands of emails, then you pay pennies after that. So anyway, go take a look at them. Let's check on our install for this. Still not done. Wow, okay. But you get the idea. Once this gets installed, I'm going to go into my view controller. If you remember, the third step after you do pod install was to import that library. So we would import, I believe it was called Reachability Swift. Now the autocomplete would normally come up for this. Reachability Swift, there we go. And then the other one is usually the same name, but let's go back to the documentation. Oh, I don't have the documentation on there. I guess I got rid of it. Now you got to track down the site. So iProgress Hub, there it is. And here it is, iProgress Hub. Okay, so it just had the same name as the package, which is always good. Sometimes it's different. Just wanted to double check that. Okay, so right now, because that's not installed yet, and if you forget to install, if you forget to run pod install, you'll see this. But actually, it looks like it just, oh, not yet. Okay, yeah, I was going to say, just finished up the install. Okay, so it installed the Reachability Swift, or it should have. Okay, module reachability. So as I mentioned, it's not always the same name as the package, and so in this case it's reachability. All right, so this is where we're supposed to be at. Now, again, I ran pod install on the Reachability Swift package, and then as I was installing, I added this new package, and so this is why Xcode is not recognizing this. So all I have to do is go back to our command line. As you can see, it just installed. If you look at your log here, it installed Reachability Swift, and not only that, is it installed version 4.3. And that's going to be the latest. If I run it again and they have a new update, it'll update that. So I'm just going to run pod install again. This will go a lot quicker. My apologies, guys. I should have ran this first, at least just to test. I ran on my other account, but different accounts will have different cached files. All right, so then it installed the iProgress HUD version 1.1.1, which I assume is the latest. I'd have to go look it up, but it should have installed it. Now when I go back to my project here, I could either wait a second or just do Command B to build, and it'll automatically build it. Now you can see I haven't added any of my own source code to this, but it is building almost 300 files. All right, so one thing I noticed kind of off the bat is, well, we got a whole bunch of errors. So I didn't really test this before, I just kind of showed you how this would work. But one of the problems that you're going to run into, which is great that I'm illustrating this, is that this was actually an Objective-C project and not a Swift project. And so there are ways to add Objective-C, but you can't just add it willy-nilly. You have to actually mark it as an Objective-C project. So I'm going to just uninstall that. You can unimport it here and then go back to our pod file and try again. So instead of iProgress HUD, which I've used in the past even with Swift projects, maybe you do want to have something that is native to Swift. But I'm looking at it, I'm just looking at the language, and it is Swift. So anyway, your mileage will vary on what libraries you choose to include in your file. So again, I will be adding some of these files to the projects as we go with these live streams, if it makes sense to. If you guys have any questions, now is the time to ask. We have about 5 more minutes on the live stream, but yeah, we'll see. I'm just checking out something here. So yeah, I'll give you 5 more minutes to ask questions, and as I mentioned, type those into the chat. Otherwise, we will end the live stream here in about 5 minutes. All right, sorry, I was just checking my notes and waiting for any chat messages, ask any questions. So again, we'll have the next live stream up next Tuesday at about the same time. I will post the event to the channel. So just go to the channel. At the very top of the channel's homepage, you'll see the different events that are scheduled. Again, I'm doing Android and iOS. You can watch them at the same time. We're starting Android at the beginning of the course, whereas iOS, since we just did that last semester, we are continuing with that kind of a more advanced iOS class that I haven't been able to do because usually I do every class. It starts from the beginning, and I never really get to the more complex topics. So I kind of want to do these concurrently with Android. Next semester, during the fall semester, I'll do more advanced Android topics, and we'll start from the beginning for iOS. But of course, I already have all the iOS videos for Swift 4 on the channel, so go ahead and watch those. And again, if you want to see some more complex topics, if you're having an issue with your own program and you want to add some functionality, well, check out CocoaPods, but feel free to ask in the comments or in the chat, and we'll definitely help you out. Hopefully you can ask those before the live stream, so I have a little bit of time to prepare those. But I'm here for you guys. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next Tuesday. Thanks.